coming here tonight. Thank you for joining us on the live stream. My name is Julia. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm on the events team here at Books Are Magic. Before we get started tonight, just a few quick logistics for everyone in the crowd. First off, we do ask that you keep your mask on at all times while at this event. Secondly, we're going to be doing a hand-raised audience Q&A towards the end of the event, so start thinking of your questions now and then hang on to them. After the talk, Erika is going to be signing and personalizing books at the desk all the way at the back of the store, and we're also going to have additional books available to purchase up at the register where you came in. And if you're joining us on the YouTube live stream, we'd love for you also to purchase a copy of Crying in the Bathroom. You can use the link in the live stream to do so. All right, with all those logistics out of the way, I'm so very excited tonight to introduce Erika L. Sánchez and Rachel Kahan, who are here celebrating the release of Erika's newest book, Crying in the Bathroom. I first read Erika's writing when I picked up I'm Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter a few years ago already, and I was completely taken in both by the book's deep emotional weight and its lighter moments of humor. And I'm happy to say that Crying in the Bathroom, which is Erika's first foray into nonfiction, strikes that same balance perfectly as Erika generously shares herself with us, the readers. This is a book that's sure to make every reader feel really deeply, and in particular, I love what Jason Reynolds says about the book. It really resonated for me. Erika L. Sánchez has undoubtedly cemented herself as not just one of my favorite writers, but also as my best friend in my mind. Because why wouldn't I want to be close to someone so intentional, so funny, so proven, and most importantly, so self-aware they could tell a story about their life in a way that makes me take inventory of my own. Erika L. Sánchez is a Mexican-American poet, novelist, and essayist. Her debut poetry collection, Lessons on Expulsion, was a finalist for the PEN America Open Book Award, and her debut young adult novel, I Am Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter, was a New York Times bestseller and a National Book Awards finalist. It is now being made into a film directed by America Ferrera. Sánchez, that's really exciting. Erika was a 2017-2019 Princeton Arts Fellow, a 2018 recipient of the 21st Century Award from the Chicago Public Library Foundation, and a 2019 recipient of the National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship. And as I mentioned, Erika is joined in conversation tonight by Rachel Kahan. Rachel is VP and Executive Editor at William Morrow. A passionate advocate for diversity in the writing and publishing business, she has published numerous national and international bestsellers by authors from many backgrounds. Born, raised, and educated in Virginia, Rachel now lives in Brooklyn with her family. She and Erika have been friends since their paths crossed while blogging under pseudonyms circa 2010. So without further ado, everyone please give a very warm welcome to Erika and Rachel.
First of all, just thank you so much for being here. I am so moved by all the support I've received so far. It's incredible. I can't even begin to process it right now, but I'm very, very grateful. I hope this book speaks to you in some form, and I just feel very lucky and I feel very loved. So I just wanted to share that with you. Thank you.
Thank you for reading my friend's book. She's amazing, and I've been able to see the world recognize that in the last few years, and it's awesome. You deserve everything. You really do.
Thank you.
Do you want to read?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Got a bar.
You're going to totally take that. Just ignore my flags on it.
Introduction. I grew up thinking I didn't matter, that no one cared what I had to say. The world didn't see me, a daughter of working class Mexican immigrants. And what it did see, it considered disposable, inconsequential. I rarely found portrayals of anyone like me, bookish and poor and surly and brown, in the art that I enjoyed. I searched everywhere for a model for the life I wanted, but found few. I wanted to be a writer and travel around the world, but I had no idea how I was going to make that happen. I saw only snippets of that kind of life here and there. Texts like the poetry of Sandra Cisneros were a lifeline. Here was a Mexican girl from Chicago who'd become a writer and traveled alone through Europe. But texts like hers were rare finds for me because it seemed I was the only one in my immediate vicinity looking for them. My teachers didn't often teach books by people of color, and I didn't have mentors or access to the internet, which was rudimentary at the time. The libraries in my community were so limited and hostile toward children that I began stealing books from the bookstore. Today, of course, I know that there were other books out there at the time that spoke to who I was, but they didn't make it into my hands very often. So when no template existed, I did with what Lucille Clifton wrote about in her poem, "Won't You Celebrate With Me?" and made it up. When I began writing about this life that I'd made up, I was plagued by a nagging voice that asked, "Erika, who the fuck cares?" The answer was always a memory of how deeply affirming it was for me to discover myself in the little art that declared a story like mine worthy. I wanted a place for myself in this tradition, and when I began seeking more texts of women writers while in college, I started to see where I fit in. I consider Toni Morrison the patron saint of my writing. To write with her level of honesty and clarity is my North Star. Virginia Woolf is referenced in this book again and again, both for her work and for her tragic life, which I suppose are one and the same. Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz became a model for my rebellion, and the list goes on and on. None of my books would have been written without these extraordinary authors. I'm indebted to all the women who came before, those who paved the way, as well as those whose talents were extinguished, buried, or sublimated because the world was afraid of their strength. It's thanks to their rebellion, big and small, that I get to lead this extraordinary life that is a life completely of my choosing. I am myself in a world that pressures me to be otherwise, a world that doesn't love me, wasn't built for me. Women of color are regularly praised for our resilience, but what's too often overlooked is that our resilience is a response to so many forms of violence. For us, resilience is more than a noble trait. It's a lifestyle that oppression has demanded of us. Either we adapt or we die. Even so, we need not be mere caricatures. Our stories matter, despite what the rest of society would like us to believe. So here I present to you a series of my musings, misfortunes, triumphs, disappointments, delights, and resurrections. I have pieced this all together to the best of my ability, but I also acknowledge that memory is tricky, slippery, alive, and ever-changing as the years pass. We all see different versions of the same thing. I have written the truest book I was capable of creating. It's the way I've made sense of the world and my life. Thank you for being on this earth with me.
So I wanted to start with how this book kind of came to be, because you started out as a poet and you won a bunch of prizes doing that, and then you wrote a YA novel and you won some prizes doing that, and you sold some of those. And a lot of people would have been perfectly happy doing nothing else. But I want to talk about like did you just sort of wake up one morning and say, you know what, it's time just for me to let it all hang out. In the first person nonfiction, I'm just gonna tell it rather than kind of refracting it through the lenses of other different kinds of writing.
Yeah, I think I had been building up towards it. I never imagined that I would write nonfiction, but I grew up, well, as a young woman, I was reading Mary Carr, I was reading Joan Didion, I was reading, Gloria Anzaldúa, etc., Sandra Cisneros. And so I felt like that was like embedded in me, and it was inevitable that I eventually write essays. And what happened was that after my novel was picked up for publication, that's when I started writing this book. And so, because I needed another project, I always need a project or else I feel like I'm kind of floating in the ether. And so I was asked to write an essay about ambition for this anthology called Double Bind. And it was about women and ambition, and all these amazing writers were in it. It was really exciting. And so writing that essay gave me something I had never experienced before. I felt liberated by writing the actual truth. And so that's how I began this. And the first essay that I wrote was Crying in the Bathroom. And I don't know, so it healed something for me. And I was like, well, I have to keep doing it. I didn't set out to write a whole book, but it just felt right. And I like to challenge myself and make things hard, as my mother would tell me.
You also have a reference in the book to that painting by Frida Kahlo, where she's like literally giving birth to herself. Her own head is coming out of her vagina. And I wondered whether this book was like, there was some aspect of that, because I remember reading a really early draft of this book, and it was completely different by the time it came out because so many things had happened, like the whole second half of this book.
That's right.
I think. And like, what was that? Do you feel like you were sort of like in the act of giving birth when you were writing this?
Yeah, in a sense. I mean, it was really, really painful. I write because it's the way that I survive, and it's not like, a pastime, or I kind of like it sometimes. Like it's this thing that I was born to do, and I feel that very deeply. And I felt that if it's not hard, it's not worth writing. Like, what am I doing? So yes, it felt terrible. I cried. I was in the fetal position. I watched a lot of 90 Day Fiancé. I got massages. I did all sorts of stuff to try to take care of myself while I was writing it. And honestly, the most difficult chapter is Difficult Son. And that one just really took a lot of strength. It took a lot of just picking at wounds and reliving moments that are terrible,
Remind people which chapter that is for the people who haven't reading yet.
That chapter is about being extremely depressed after Mexican Daughter came out, and finding myself in the psych ward, among other places. So, a lot happened.
Yeah. I was struck by what you said about resilience, because I remember reading, and I've forgotten who sort of said it. It may have been a meme that I saw, but someone said, a lot of times what we honor in women as resilience is actually just endurance.
Yeah.
It's just like survival. And I think I sort of saw elements of that in this too.
Yeah, I feel like I was surviving for a lot of my life because I just never felt at home anywhere. I never felt like I belonged anywhere. I felt different. I was depressed, I was deeply, deeply depressed. I was pursuing this crazy career that no one really understood. I was very feminist. I've been feminist since I was a little girl. And, in a Mexican household, that's not really welcomed, you know, like it's not encouraged to call out, you know, the division of labor in the house. And so like I was always like, I would see the world in a way that was hard. I was like, well, why does it have to be like this? Why are women treated like this? Why are, you know, queer people treated like this? Why are trans people treated like I just couldn't comprehend, you know, and racism was very baffling to me, and it still is. And you know, I felt like I needed to channel all of that into my work, just so I could like make sense of what was happening.
But you also talk about how in your house as a child and in your adult life, like making fun of that shit, like just humor is sort of what gets you through, and that's why this book is like a really funny book. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, well, I feel like Mexicans and a lot of people of color, marginalized people, deal with trauma by you know, making fun of it, by finding the humor in it, because otherwise you're just gonna like lay down and die, because it's just all too much, right? And so I learned to cope with my depression by, you know, laughing really hard with my friends and making fun of stupid things. And you know, Mexicans, I feel like, have this sensibility of joking about the things that are most difficult in life. And so like I grew up hearing the term for work as la chinga, you know, and I thought that was funny, and I was like, yeah, it is. I didn't know. I would learn later. But yeah, it's something that is in our culture, you know, our sensibility of just like understanding how absurd it is to be alive, you know, and how just life sometimes is just nonsense.
You talk a little bit about, you know, your struggles with mental illness even when you were young, and then I love there was a line in there where you say, and you were just always open about it. You didn't, you know, try to hide it the way so many of us are sort of taught that it's something that needs to be hushed up. And now, as a result, folks in your family come to you and sort of tell you about their own difficulties. And I wondered, you know, has your family, like, have they read this, or have they? I mean, they know that you're out here talking about it. What's the response been? Is it helpful to them, do you think?
Well, my brothers read it, and I love my brothers. They're like some of the best men I've ever met, and so I have a very affectionate relationship with them. I think that they're really just good people, and they read it, and I trusted them with it, you know, like they were gonna read it whether I wanted them to read it or not, but like I felt comfortable because they know me, they know what I've been through, they don't judge me. They're people that I do the podcast with, if anyone's listened to the podcast at this point. It's just
Give
that,
it a plug.
oh yeah, No Chingues is what it's called. And it's just like me, my two brothers, and my husband just talking shit. And it's very fun for us. I don't know if it's fun for you, but we have a good time. But yeah, they read it. My mom said she doesn't want to read it because it would be too painful for her, because there's a lot of stuff that I went through that she doesn't know about. Yeah. And I respect that, because it would be excruciating for me to read something about my daughter suffering, you know? And so, my dad, he's just not gonna read it, so. And then like extended family, like whatever, I really don't care what they think. And I think that's helped me a great deal to think like, you know, to not worry about what my tias are gonna say, you know, what are my uncles gonna think about me? It's irrelevant, you know. It's like they're not really part of my life in that way for me to care.
What about reader reception?
Well, I mean, I hope you like it, you know?
Well, right, no, I get that, they'll like it.
Yeah.
But I was thinking about, you talk about in the book, how one of the things that really kind of helped save you when you were, really feeling suicidal was going and meeting a group of girls who had read I'm Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter, and sort of feeling like, well, I'm not gonna speak for you, can you speak about that?
Sure, yeah, that was a really important moment for me, I think, and she's referring to a time in the book where I am extremely suicidal and I don't know what to do. I had this plan to like end my life, and I had actually work that I needed to get to, and I needed to come to New York and go to a conference and talk about my book, but like I didn't know how I was going to do that in the state that I was in. And so somehow I managed to drag myself to Manhattan, and I did the panel, and all these young women came up and they were just so sweet, and they were telling me how much the book meant to them, that they had never seen themselves in a book before. And I felt really, I don't know, I felt accountable, because I'm like, if I kill myself, like what does that mean, to everybody else? And so that was a really jarring moment for me. And obviously I'm here and things have improved, but yeah, that moment was really important, just to understand what the work meant to everybody else.
When we were walking over here, I had said to Erika, like, hey, you wanna talk about the abortion part of the book? Because I feel like in our cultural moment, this is when we should be talking about abortion. And I was listening to an interview that Erika did on the radio, and I was kind of struck by one of the things, like there was a little kind of trigger warning at the start of it where they said, there's going to be graphic discussions of suicide and also abortion. And I sort of said to Erika, like, that really didn't land right with me, because abortion is like necessary health care for us. And we need to be talking about it in that light. Not that it's something dangerous to society, but that it is like something that we need to do. So, and I thought that I thought that when you did that interview, you had a really, thoughtful and full-throated defense of why you had to have an abortion and how I think it saved your life. I remember what that was like.
It was a bad time.
It was a bad time. And I think you're here. And I'm not sure you would have been otherwise, and I think, I had told Erika I had an abortion at 41 for my physical health, and I think that may have saved my life. And I think we need to talk about these things so people realize that it's not just something that people do, it is something that we have to do. So I wanted to just like flip it to you so that you can talk about that, because it's such an important message from this book.
Yeah, abortion should be a human right, because it's a procedure that saves women's lives and other people's lives as well. And I feel like we have come to a point in our country in which it's been so politicized that it's no longer about that. It's taken on another sort of life. And I think Republicans, conservatives have really twisted this issue just for their own benefit. Like they made it so that this is an issue that we fight about. It wasn't that. And I'm horrified by what's happened. I'm horrified by this reversal of Roe v. Wade, which I didn't even know was a thing. I felt like we were safe in that way. I mean, I knew that there were all these restrictions, and they're finding ways to make it really difficult, but this is just so large. And for me to write about my abortion, there's no shame in it because it did save my life. I feel, and even if it didn't, there shouldn't be any shame. Whatever you decide to do with your own body is your own business, and I hate that these withered old motherfuckers are telling us how we're supposed to live. I think they want to keep poor people poor. They want to control women. This is for their own benefit. It's not because they care about the fetus or that they think it's a person or whatever they say. It's driving a wedge between sides here in this country, and it was all manufactured. It's nonsense.
That's right. When we get to sort of the end of the book, you sort of start out, I remember one time you wrote, I think it was on Instagram, that you have this vision of your grandchildren coming upon all of your stuff in the attic and being like, damn, grandma was out hoeing around. And yeah, now they can read the book, but when you now you've kind of come into your own as a senora, that's you're entering this.
I have.
You have, because I remember you've had some. I even remember you posted some pictures of yourself and you're feeling very big senora vibes.
Sometimes,
you get to that. You're a mom. You have a husband who is the bomb.
He's so good.
He's so awesome. He is as good as he appears in this book. May we all have partners who are that good. When you look back at sort of the young tormented hoe about town, and sort of from where you are now, is there how do you feel towards your former self? It's sort of a cliche in interviews to be what would you say to your former self? But really, how do you sort of look back and synthesize who you were then with who you are now?
Yeah, I look back sometimes and I don't even recognize myself hardly. I'm why did I do that? It's hard to even fathom why I was with certain men. I look back on my dating history and I'm horrified. And then, but then I'm well, it led me to my husband. All of these roads led me to the life that I have now. And I went through really tough times and I felt very lonely and I felt untethered in the world. And I was out hoeing because I just wanted to feel something, I wanted to feel wanted. And I think that's a normal thing to do when you grow up, not having that validation from your family, from your dad, from your mom, from the world. You seek it in other ways, and I feel that's part of what I was doing, and so I understand that part of myself and I have compassion for that part, but there are some times where I'm just kind of taken aback by my own shenanigans.
I think that's the sign that you've lived a full life. So,
good.
Right? Yeah. Is there anything else that you want to say, or should we kind of throw it to the audience for questions?
Yeah, let's get some questions.
Hi, Erika.
Hi.
So I read I'm Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter and loved it. And it seems that you wrote this novel that is so closely related in some ways to your own experience, to your own life. And you wrote it in the first person point of view too. And I imagine that was very hard. It was like a hard stylistic choice to pull off. It would be for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering if you could talk about how you managed to keep your real story and this fictional story that you created separate through craft, how you did it as a writer.
Yeah, well, I knew that I wanted to write a story about a Mexican American misfit. That I wanted to write a story about a girl who just didn't fit in anywhere and was at odds with her family, and because that was my experience. But I decided to fictionalize a lot of it in order to tell the best story that I could tell. And so it wouldn't have worked as a young adult memoir, in my opinion. I feel like that would have been really bad. And so I took elements of my life and then expanded upon them throughout. And so, you know, I mentioned my two brothers. I don't have a sister. That was fiction, and that helped me separate from the text and from the character. And like the character is me, but she's not me at the same time. It's messy. It's not clear cut. I can't really go through the book and tell you what's real and what's not, but I felt like I needed the liberty to make the best story possible, and that meant inventing, fictionalizing, and drawing upon, of course, you know, all of these different experiences that I had. And so it was hard, but once I got into that mindset, it made sense, and I was there. I became Julia in my head. And then with this new book, it's all the literal truth, and it starts it starts senior year of college. And so it's like the book for those who read, you know, Mexican Daughter when it came out, because it's a sort of continuation, not really a sequel, because I was never going to write a sequel, but this continues a lot of the same themes, but it's all literally true.
What else?
Hi, so my name is Elvira, and I just want to remind you that you are a chingona, you are a badass. So I wanted to ask you, like, what are some affirmations that you say to yourself or like write to remind you of your chingonaness, like during like the hard days or during just like the challenges to overcome?
Yeah, I still have a lot of hard days, and I think that what really keeps me going is understanding the power that I have. You know, like I don't take it lightly that so many people have bought my books. I don't take it lightly that a lot of people care about what I say and what I think. And so it's like I feel like a sort of responsibility, you know, as a professor, also as a mother, like to keep going, because what else is there to do? But yeah, I think one thing I learned through therapy is when I encounter a problem that really isn't about me, but it's like affecting me, I have to remind myself, like, that's not my shit, you know? So if someone's projecting onto you some insecurity, some jealousy, whatever, you just, like, you create a barrier. That's not mine. And so that's been really helpful. Also, I have a Latina therapist that I just started seeing, and good God, she's really gotten to the root of a lot of problems in a short amount of time. So I highly recommend finding, if you can, of course, it's very hard to find someone who is like culturally competent to give you therapy, because like people don't really get it. They don't get the mother-daughter shit. They don't get like the immigrant guilt and the labor, all the trauma, you know. And so it's been really beautiful for me to sit with someone who understands that, and I don't have to explain so much. I don't have to give context because she knows the context.
Got it. Thank
Yeah,
you.
sure.
Hi, my name is Deanna. I'm an 8th grade English teacher, and my students love your book.
Aww.
And across genders, like everyone, boys
so
are so connected to it. So I just wanted to thank you for that. And I was curious if you could talk about just your writing process.
Yeah.
Like, I'm also a aspiring writer, and I was just curious about like your revision process and sort of your lens when you get to the, or trying to get to the end.
Yeah, I'm a mess when it comes to my process, so it's really hard to describe. the kind of person who all of a sudden gets inspired and I'm like running to my office to write something down, or I'm walking down the street and I have an idea and I write in my notebook, or I do a voice memo. I read a ton because that's the most important thing when writing, so that's always a part of my life. And it's kind of like a patchwork of stuff. Like poems for me, for instance, like I have little snippets like throughout my files, and somehow I end up putting them together in a way that makes sense. It's kind of like putting a puzzle together, and I find that so exciting. I find that really fun. And so yeah, it's some days I don't write, and some days I write until I am, you know, my eyes are red. It just all depends, you know, it's different. And especially now that I have a child, like, you know, I can't just be writing when I feel like it, you know, I wish. If she's around, like maybe I'll write in a notebook, and maybe when she was little, she would sit on my lap and I would, you know, type. And she thought that was pretty cool, but now she's too big for that. So yeah, it's kind of hard to describe it. I listen to music, you know, I take walks.
Thanks.
Erika, hi, thank you so much for your work and for sharing your stories with us. You know, living in this country where there was just such little representation, reading your book was just really profound in so many ways, and connecting with Punya, and you know, I felt like perhaps you were peeking into the windows of my home growing up, because some of the stories I related to. And so yeah, so thank you, because in this world, again, with such little representation, I feel like there's a little less tension within my own body with some representation through your stories. So with that being said, thank you, and just wondering what the publication world is kind of like. It seems like it's still so like white, patriarchal.
Yeah.
What's that journey process like? Because I know we're out there, the stories are out there, and it's just frustrating that there's just such little of it, you know, coming out, if you will.
Yeah, I think
I'm
it's
just gonna repeat this for the
sure.
live stream, just
Yeah.
because you're sort of in the back of the room.
Oh.
So the question is about representation in publishing, and how it continues to be very monolithically white, and sort of the question is about what's Erika's experience been in the publishing world as a writer.
Yeah, I mean, at first, no one wanted the novel. I sent it to agents, and I got some very rude responses. You know, do you remember that?
I remember that person's name too.
Yeah. So I felt like, oh my God, like how can I bring this to life? How can I bring this to the world when people don't believe in it? When people don't get it? When they think that the character is abrasive or annoying or unlikable or whatever, which I think is all irrelevant, honestly. And so, you know, I kept submitting to many different agents, and actually Rachel introduced me to my agent now, and she believed in it. And, you know, all it takes is one person to believe in you to get you in the door. And after that, we sold it, but only one publisher wanted it, you know, and so like, I think people didn't understand the need for it. They didn't understand that there were people like us all over the country, like just starving for literature that is relatable, right? And so, you know, that all changed once the book came out, and it has done so well, and now they see the value in it, and also, you know, this shit sells. So like, what are they doing? You know, I just don't really understand. There are a lot of changes. I think since then there's been a real shift, but it still remains largely white and male. And I want Rachel to chime in because she works in the publishing industry.
So I actually have given hour-long talks about this as someone who has always published writers from marginalized communities, and I think you're absolutely correct. It is still like a very monolithically white business. A lot of people are sort of like me, like I'm a college-educated white woman who grew up in the suburbs, and that has been sort of for my generation, the kind of people who've been making these decisions, and it has been very difficult to get people to understand that not only is representation important because you deserve to see your world and your experiences reflected in literature, but on the other side, it's also important for white children who are reading these books to understand that they are not always the protagonists of every story out there, that like the universe is not centered around white people and white experience. And so actually one of the things, I do think Erika's right that there has been a change, and it has been coming slowly, and then since about 2020, I think there was this massive cultural shift where suddenly a lot of publishers were like, oh shit, we actually have to start caring about this because the rest of America is really starting to care about it. And you can be cynical about that shift, I am, but I think that more and more, especially in YA, you really are seeing like this diversity of all kinds of experiences. So not just along like racial and ethnic lines, but also talking about transgender kids and gay kids and getting into discussions about what it means to have mental health problems and depression and suicidal ideation. So I feel like really good when I go back there and look at like the YA shelf, because I feel like a lot of experiences are being reflected. And in the adult publishing world that I work in, I think the change has been a little bit slower to come, but I do think it's happening, and I'm really excited because I think that younger readers now in 10 years are really going to be demanding the same kind of representation when they're adults, and I think that's going to push the business even further. I'm just sorry that it's taken a while to get to this point. Like you have to publish the books and see that they sell, and that at the end of the day is persuasive, and your books have sold a lot of copies.
Yeah, I don't think
You
they
can tell them how
expected that.
many. You can tell them how many.
I can tell them?
You can tell them.
Well, Mexican Daughter has sold 500,000 copies. Yeah, it's incredible. Thanks to you, so clap for yourselves.
I think there was a question in the back.
Something that really struck me while reading Crying in the Bathroom was how, the writing was so simultaneously poetic and also conversational. And so I guess my question is just about how you have written poetry, you've written fiction, and now you've written memoir. And so I'm curious how all of those different genres inform each other while you're writing, and during the process of writing this memoir, if it just kind of came out that way, if it was intentional to have that, mixture of, poetry and prose and things like that. So
Yeah.
that's a broad question, but yeah.
No,
I'm gonna repeat it, just
Yeah,
so
oh,
for
that's
the
right.
live stream, just because in the back, I don't know if it picks it up. The question was about Erika's background as a poet and a novelist, and the way that comes out in the prose, and sort of how that's intentional and how it all works together.
Yeah, well, I've been a poet since I was 12 years old. When I first discovered poetry, it made me feel alive. It made me feel excited. I felt like it was something that I was meant to do. And so ever since then, I've been writing poems, and that's kind of how I think in terms of like seeing the world. I think from the lens of a poet. And so I feel like that translates to prose. When I write prose, I want the prose to be accessible, but I also want it to be beautiful. I want it to be alive. I want it to crackle. I want it to, make you feel things. And I want to convey things in a way that is unique, is fresh. And so I feel like I owe poetry so much because it's allowed me to see the world in this way. And, you know, the humor came through because that's just how I am, you know, as a person. I can't be serious for that long because it hurts. I don't even know how to do that. And so when I teach, I'm always joking. Like, that's just who I am. And before I was like, maybe I should like tone it down. But it's like, no, actually I'm not going to, because it's who I am and they like it and I'm still teaching them. And so, you know, I think for so long, women weren't encouraged to be funny, or like we weren't given the permission to be funny. And so fuck that, you know, like it's just take up space in all ways. And yeah, thank you for acknowledging that mix. It's just a sensibility that I guess I've developed for a long time.
One more in the back, yeah.
Hi, my name is Grace, and at the beginning you talked about growing up, how you were predominantly reading novels from like cis white men, and how that shaped your upbringing in this world. And I was wondering if your younger self could read the novel and memoir that you wrote today, how do you think like she would respond, or what do you think she would say?
Just repeat that. So the question was that in Erika's book, she talked about how when she was young, she read a lot of books by cis white men, and how would her younger self feel if a book like this had been available to her?
Young Erika would have thrown the book across the room, just like overwhelmed with feelings, probably. If I would have read something where I recognized myself, then it would have made me feel like I mattered, you know, because I didn't feel like I did. And so, you know, when the first time that I truly felt seen by a movie, for instance, is Real Women Have Curves, you know, like that movie changed everything for me. I was like, holy shit, like this is monumental. I've never ever seen this. And, you know, I think we're in the place where there's such a demand for these kinds of stories that we can't go back to those times where kids only read, you know, The Catcher in the Rye. You know, I love Catcher in the Rye, but it's like there's more. There's more.
I don't like it. Sorry, not sorry.
We can't be friends anymore.
You can break up with me over that.
One more question?
As a very imperfect Mexican daughter myself, I wanted to ask if you deal with or how you deal with resentment towards our culture's perception of women.
Oh, wait, could you ask it in a different way? I'm trying to follow exactly, because I think I know what you're saying, but I want to be sure.
So growing up, I didn't like the morals my family had for me, and I tried really hard to take them on as my own, but it failed terribly because I just was so rebellious as a child, and I didn't really understand why things had to go a certain way, exactly the way you said.
Yeah.
So now as a grown woman and living so far away from my family, I feel like I want to be proud of my culture, but I also have this resentment towards what they've thrown onto me.
Yes.
As much as I want to love it, it's just I get triggered.
No,
by them.
I totally get it, and I was asked this last night, so a lot of people are wondering how to negotiate all of that, and it's not easy, it's messy. I too have resented our culture for various reasons, but I also love our culture for other reasons, and so it's like this hodgepodge that I put together for myself. Like, I love the hospitality that we have, I love our food, I love our music, I love our resilience, I love our humor, all of these things. I don't love misogyny, so that's not going to be part of my life. You know, I'm not going to raise my daughter like that. I don't love the homophobia, and you know, that doesn't exist in my house. So it's like you can take, I think, what is beautiful and what is oppressive, you can leave behind. And I think it's okay sometimes to get pissed off. It's, how could we not, you know, the way that we're treated in our families oftentimes. And so it's not like an easy process, but it is possible to celebrate who you are, where you come from, and then still be critical of a lot of the structures that have been imposed upon you.
Do we have time for one more question?
Yeah, one last.
Yeah, that's you.
So I don't have a question, I just wanted to say, as someone who's not a writer, you know, I picked up this book, right, like, before the pandemic started, and, I'm sorry, I'm starting to get emotional because the part with your mom was so, like, it was so emotional because I've had, you know, like, my own experiences with my mom, and, she's actually not from Mexico, she's from Guatemala, so a lot of, like, her not understanding me and, like, you know, kind of like butting heads throughout the years, that part in the, it's like towards the end of the book where you have that conversation with her. Wow, I just like started bawling because it was so, like, I think so many, you know, young women go through that, you know, and just thank you so much for being so raw and so honest because, you know, I mean, I'm a grown adult, but I read this and it took me back 20 years, so thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was like the perfect way.
Just gonna pop up here for one more minute. Want to thank you all again for being here, for such wonderful questions. Want to thank you both for such an engaging conversation. Just a reminder, Erika is going to be signing at that back desk. Let's give her a beat to get settled, but then you can start lining up. We do have additional copies of Crying in the Bathroom up at the front where you came in, as well as a few copies of I'm Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter. For those still with us on YouTube, again, links to my books in the description. And if you are in store with us, we do ask that once you've purchased your books, you do make your way downstairs so we can start to pack up this space. And we're going to unlock that door and you'll be able to exit through the back as well. That's all from me, and let's give these two one last round.